tonight, we turn our attention to a meeting that may appear ordinary at first glance. But a closer look reveals something far more consequential. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskiy is preparing to meet former U.S. President Donald Trump in Florida. Officially, the focus of this meeting is discussion around a potential peace plan for Ukraine. Being yet, when you consider the timing, the setting, and the political significance of the two figures involved, it becomes clear that this is not just another diplomatic conversation. And this moment raises an important question. Are we witnessing the early stages of a genuine effort to bring an end to the war in Ukraine? No? Or is this the first move in a broader political and geopolitical calculation? According to Reuters, President Zelensky will travel to Florida for talks with Donald Trump centered on Ukraine's proposed framework for peace. That development stands out for several key reasons. Donald Trump is no longer merely a former president. He remains one of the most influential figures in American politics today. At the same time, Ukraine has entered a phase of the war where battlefield momentum is harder to sustain and diplomatic avenues are becoming sport. And Russia has already made it clear that it does not accept the structure of the peace plan currently under discussion. So when President Zelensky chooses to engage Trump directly away from Washington and outside traditional diplomatic channels, it sends a deliberate signal why this meeting matters. To understand why this meeting carries weight, we need to take a step back and examine the current state of the war. Ukraine has been resisting a full-scale invasion for years. Western military and financial assistance has been critical in helping Kyiv defend itself and, at times, regain territory. But the conflict has also evolved into something far more difficult to resolve: a prolonged war of attrition. Blind losses continue to mount. Economic strain is growing. And signs of political exhaustion are beginning to surface, not only across Europe, but increasingly within the United States as well. Against this backdrop, President Zelensky is acutely aware that Ukraine's long-term survival depends heavily on sustained American support. That support, however, is no longer guaranteed to look the same in the future. Donald Trump represents a possible shift in U.S. leadership and, with it, a fundamentally different approach to the war in Ukraine. His views on military aid, alliances, and negotiations stand in contrast to current U.S. policy. That reality alone elevates this meeting beyond symbolism. It makes it a strategic calculation, one that reflects how Ukraine is preparing for multiple political scenarios in Washington. And it explains why this conversation, taking place far from the usual corridors of power, matters now more than ever. The peace plan and the Trump factor, for months now, Ukraine has been promoting a multi-point peace proposal aimed at ending the conflict. At its core, the plan is built around several non-negotiable principles. Ukraine insists on preserving its territorial integrity. It seeks firm security guarantees to prevent future aggression. And it calls for the withdrawal of Russian forces from occupied areas. But while the framework is clear, the specifics are far more complicated. Some parts of the plan involve long-term international security arrangements. Others touch directly on disputed territories where control remains contested. And nearly every element of the proposal depends on continued and unified backing from Ukraine's allies, particularly the United States. This is where Donald Trump enters the picture. Trump has repeatedly claimed that if given the chance, he could bring the war to an end quickly. Yet he has offered few concrete details about how such a resolution would be achieved. That lack of clarity is precisely what makes this meeting significant. It may provide the first real insight into what Trump's vision of a negotiated settlement actually involves, and whether it aligns in any meaningful way with Ukraine's core demands. At the same time, Trump's broader foreign policy record suggests an unconventional approach. He has openly criticized the scale of U.S. aid to Ukraine. He has questioned long-standing commitments to NATO. And he has argued that prolonged conflict abroad does not serve American interests. And Trump also presents himself as a deal maker. High-profile negotiations and dramatic breakthroughs fit squarely within that image. Oh, man, for President Zelensky, this creates a delicate balance. There is opportunity because Trump could shape future U.S. policy in decisive ways. But there is also risk because Ukraine's strategic priorities may clash with a more transactional, results-focused approach to diplomacy. Russia's position and Europe's concerns. While Ukraine explores diplomatic openings, Russia's position remains largely unchanged. Moscow has consistently dismissed peace proposals that do not acknowledge its territorial claims. Russian officials have stated repeatedly that any agreement must reflect what they describe as the realities on the ground. In practical terms, this means Russia is not prepared to engage with a framework that calls for a full withdrawal of its forces or a return to Ukraine's pre-war borders. Chanda, that reality makes the meeting in Florida even more significant. Lenja, without Russia's participation or at least meaningful pressure on Moscow, any discussion of peace remains largely theoretical. Diplomacy in this case cannot move forward without confronting that fundamental obstacle. At the same time, European leaders are watching these developments with growing attention. Many governments across Europe have committed substantial political capital and financial resources to supporting Ukraine's defense. They are cautious about any peace process that could weaken Ukraine, as position or establish precedents that might encourage future aggression elsewhere. Yet Europe is also feeling the cumulative strain of a prolonged conflict. Energy markets remain sensitive. Defense budgets are under pressure, and public opinion in several countries is showing signs of fatigue. BND Allen, for European allies, the direction of U.S. policy is critical. Any shift in Washington's approach would have immediate and far-reaching consequences across the continent. What comes next? So what should we realistically expect from this meeting? It is unlikely to produce immediate breakthroughs. There will be no signed agreement, no instant ceasefire, yet the meeting carries significance beyond tangible outcomes. Why? It has the potential to shape narratives, influence political messaging, and signal how Ukraine is preparing for different possible scenarios in Washington. In geopolitics, sometimes the act of meeting itself can be as impactful as the decisions made during it. This encounter between Zelensky and Trump is not merely about a conversation in Florida. It is about the exertion of influence. It is about negotiating leverage. And it is about the slow, often imperfect way wars move from the battlefield to the negotiating table. The world will be watching closely, and the reverberations of this meeting may be felt far beyond the borders of Ukraine and the United States.